In this video, we'll create a new API query profile using Matillion's API Query Profile Wizard. Then we'll use the API Query component, which lets you load data from any accessible JSON or XML API to query the data in Matillion ETL. In this example, we'll create a new API query profile using the publicly available AWS IP ranges. Through the Manage Query Profiles menu, you can see your existing profiles and create new ones. Query profiles provide a method of querying any accessible JSON or XML-based APIs and loading the resulting data into your cloud data warehouse. We can look first at the sample API, which includes some example data, including an XML and RSD file. The RSD file is used to store the endpoint information, whereas the XML file, in this case, includes sample data that can be used for testing. Selecting the XML and clicking Test can give us a preview of the data. Let's now create an API query profile in Matillion ETL of the AWS IP ranges. This will be a simple example with no authentication. For more complex APIs, you may need to consult the API's documentation. We'll break down each array from the data into rows in a table in our cloud data platform, and each element in the array will be a column. To begin, navigate to the Project menu to manage API profiles, then Manage Query Profiles. Then press the plus button. So for this example, we'll call it AWS. Then press the Settings button next to the newly created API profile to open the Configure Query Profile pop-up dialog. Select New File to begin the wizard and create a new API profile from a file. For this example, we'll select Create Sample File, where we'll upload a sample JSON file. Then click Next. Then in the Create File section of the dialog, upload the IP ranges JSON file by clicking Browse and navigating to where you have the IP ranges JSON file stored. In the final step of the wizard, your chosen file will be uploaded. Click Validate to validate the JSON file. If it validates with no errors, click Finish. Once the API profile JSON is created, we'll generate a new query profile using the created API profile. Once an API profile JSON file is created, we'll generate a new query profile using the created API profile file. In the Configure Profile dialog, click New Endpoint to generate a new RSD script. The IP ranges JSON file will form the base of our query. Click Next, and on the Endpoint Configuration page, the contents of the JSON file will be returned in the Response tab. On this page of the wizard, you can input information about the API call you wish to make, including auth, where you can specify authentication if required, params, specify any parameters to validate the API call, users can pass parameter name, value, type, and variable type. Body, specify if required the body of the request, and response, which we've already seen is where the API call response is displayed. When a user clicks Send, the Response tab is automatically brought into view, and the following message is displayed for a validated API call. Click Next, and on this page of the wizard, users can view the structure of the data returned from the API. Matillion ETL will attempt to identify any repeating elements in the data. However, users can also specify this themselves. This will prevent duplicate data from being stored when extracting the data. Users can also configure paging by selecting one of the supporting paging schemes and providing the required parameters. For this example, we'll enable paging and select Full Path. By enabling paging, each returned dataset includes a single top-level element, Next Page URI, which points to the URL the client should use to fetch the next page. For further information about the configuration in this wizard, please refer to the full documentation, which will be linked in the description. Click Next and we'll see a sample of the data in the Data Preview window. Now click Finish and you'll return to the Configure Query Profile dialog. Select the RSD file from the Files menu to see the endpoint configuration. You can toggle Advanced Mode to open the RSD file in Edit mode, where you can have a closer look at the RSD file. Here you can see the line that names the URI, which we will use to call the IP Ranges API directly. And here, for example, you can see the column definitions. Here you can see we've defined which type of API we're dealing with, which is a JSON provider get. If we were using an XML file, this would be an XML provider get, for example. And we've also defined the HTTP REST option as get. Click Test to check the RSD file is working correctly. This will invoke the API and add IP ranges to the Tables panel. Once the API profile has been tested and confirmed to be working correctly, and is returning the data, it's ready to use in an API query component. Create an orchestration job and drag an API query component onto the canvas. You can find it under Components, Connectors, Load, or by typing API query. Navigate to the Properties panel with the API query component selected, where we can select our created API profile by selecting it from under the Profile option, then selecting IP Ranges, which is our RSD file, from the Data Source property. Then under the Data Selection option, you can select the columns to be included in your query. For this example, we'll select all the columns. For more complex queries, you can opt to use the Advanced mode, which enables you to write an SQL query for your data selection. This removes the data source and selection properties and replaces them with the SQL query property. For this example, we'll leave it on basic mode. We'll also need to specify a target table in your cloud data warehouse where the queried data will be stored. Once the component has been validated successfully, you can sample the data. Click on the Sample tab, then click Data. It should fetch the data as expected. Right-click on the canvas and click Run Job when you're happy. This will load the queried data to the specified target table. For full documentation for the API Query Profile Wizard, please visit the Matillion documentation site. And to keep up to date with the latest documentation videos, please subscribe to the Matillion documentation channel.